33 days. Nothing but salt water, howling winds, and cracked hands clinging to reality. Amid the creaking planks of the Santa Maria, a restless man who had dedicated his life to a plan the whole world called flawed, Christopher Columbus. In our history, this great gamble ended on the 33rd day with the birth of a vast empire. Yet behind this victory lay the desperation caused by the trade routes that closed in 1453 and a colossal miscalculation that underestimated the world's size by a third. What if, when the sun rose that morning, there had been nothing on the horizon again? What if Columbus's famous misguided plan had remained a suicide mission instead of a great discovery? Welcome to the Timeline Shift channel. Today, we're going beyond the actual journey of America's discovery and discussing that longest day in history, a day that never happened, when reality and the wind's direction both shifted. To understand just how close the world came to never being discovered, or at least not in the way we know it, one must grasp the desperate situation in which Europe found itself at the end of the 15th century. Europe was wealthy and ambitious, but it was in a bind. The spices in the kitchen, the fragrant incense in the churches, the silks worn by the nobility, and the paints that colored the altars all passed through a single choke point, the Eastern Mediterranean. And in 1453, the strait was closed. The fall of Constantinople. When Ottoman cannons brought down the walls of Constantinople, the Christian world was completely shaken. The Bosphorus, once a trade corridor, was now under the control of a new empire, expensive, unpredictable, and, for those in the West, deeply humiliating. Portugal was the first country to attempt to find a solution to this problem. The solution was clear: to sail around it. Portuguese sailors were making their way south along the African coast for days, years, even decades. They explored, mapped the region, died from infectious diseases, and returned to try again. It was a slow and patient endeavor, but it was finally beginning to yield results. By the 1480s, Bartholomew Dias had rounded the Cape of Good Hope and proven for the first time that Africa had an end. Beyond it lay the Indian Ocean, and it was possible to reach it. But at the same time, a quieter, far wilder idea was circulating. What if, instead of sailing around the world, you sailed right through it? Christopher Columbus. He traveled from country to country for years before anyone agreed to finance his idea. He took it to Portugal and was rejected. He took it to Genoa and was ignored. He took it to Venice and was dismissed. For years, he sat in the waiting rooms of kings. To most sensible rulers, his idea was either brilliant or nonsense, and the vast majority believed it was the latter. Columbus's mistake wasn't that he thought the world was round. Everyone educated in Europe knew the world was round. His mistake was that he thought the world was small. He had calculated the world's circumference to be smaller than it actually was and filled the gap with an imaginary continent. If the Americas hadn't actually existed, Columbus's ships would likely have ended up at the bottom of the ocean somewhere off the coast of modern-day Florida. But he probably didn't know that. And in 1492, Isabella of Spain and her husband Ferdinand, who had just completed the Reconquista and were seeking a strategic advantage over Portugal, decided that this gamble was worth the risk and provided financial support. 3 small ships, 87 men, and an ocean no European dared to cross. The fleet set sail from the port of Palos in early August. Palos de la Frontera. For the first few weeks, the fleet was in high spirits. Trade winds blew from behind, the skies remained clear, and the ships made swift progress. But as September turned to October, the atmosphere changed. The promised land was nowhere in sight. Slowly, hopes began to fade. When they reached the Sargasso Sea, the compasses began to act strangely. The people in the fleet started whispering among themselves. Some were now openly talking about turning back. The logbooks Columbus showed the crew were forged, and no one knew it. They recorded distances shorter than the actual ones traveled, to keep the panic under control. In any case, he was a man who acted with great caution and composure. And on the night of October 11th, it continued to maintain that balance. A lookout spotted a faint glimmer on the horizon. Moonlight illuminated the white sandy beach. Rodrigo de Triana. Land, he shouted. Within hours, the Santa Maria dropped anchor in waters where no European ship had ever anchored before. Columbus landed on the shore. He named the island San Salvador. He had chosen this name in honor of his queen. He raised the flag of a country 4,000 kilometers away. It was impossible to correctly interpret the expressions on the faces of the copper-skinned people watching him from among the trees. Until his death, Columbus believed he had reached the outer islands of Asia, but he was mistaken. The world he stumbled upon would change everything. The European economy. The fate of the continents. The very foundation of the modern world. Now think about it. Columbus is standing on the shore. The flag was fluttering in the wind. And now that balance is being lost. 3 days ago, a massive storm suddenly broke out in the Atlantic. The waves weren't just rocking the ships, they were crashing into them with such force that they were about to shatter them. The Santa Maria is now taking on water. The pumps aren't enough. By midnight, the ship is sinking to the bottom of the sea. Columbus goes down with it. The Nina and the Pinta barely escape and return to Spain with a depleted crew. The only thing they brought back. A tale of disaster. The message spreading through the ports of Seville and Lisbon is no miracle, but a stern warning. The Western Ocean is a death trap. That Genoese man had truly lost his mind. Spain sends no further expeditions westward. For years, perhaps decades. No new voyages will be made to the Atlantic. Meanwhile, Portugal continues to forge ahead along its familiar path. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounds the Cape of Good Hope and reaches the port of Calicut in India. Calicut. A new sea route connecting Europe and Asia has been discovered. Black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves begin arriving directly in Lisbon. Portugal suddenly becomes the richest country in Europe. Spain, meanwhile, watches in anger as it realizes how wrong its decision was. Tenochtitlan reaches its peak as a major city with a population of 200,000. The Aztec Triple Alliance maintains its strong political and economic structure. Along the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire expands its road and transportation network. In the north, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy grows politically stronger. In this timeline, the massive population collapse which wiped out 50 to 90% of the indigenous population due to diseases and conquests brought by Europeans has not yet occurred. Although Europe's discovery of the American continent was delayed, it eventually took place. Because curiosity and economic interests cannot be suppressed for long. By the 1540s, European fishing vessels had discovered the Americas through their westward voyages. But this discovery was a slow process. The encounter took place gradually and cautiously. It took a long time for indigenous communities to adapt to the new situation. The situation was far from ideal. But it was different from past experiences. By the 17th century, the world had taken on a different shape. The Atlantic Ocean is no longer under the control of a single empire. Since large quantities of silver are no longer coming from the New World, the Habsburg dynasty cannot maintain its former strength in Europe. The Reformation resurfaces. But it is less disruptive. The center of the world economy shifts to Asia and remains there for a long time. China and India remain the wealthiest regions of the world until the 1700s. European merchants are no longer the conquerors but the negotiators. In the summer of 1492, 3 ships set sail from Palos. And one man's stubborn refusal to turn back changed the world more profoundly than any army or plague ever could. What he found was not actually what he was looking for. After all, that's often how discoveries go.